Okay, so thank you so much, Sean, for coming on to the SETSI YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. You've been doing remarkable work, I'm sure, in the co-op space, and we're going to hear all about it. So before we get started, as always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all of the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So please, if you can do us the honor by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your remarkable work.
Oh, shucks. I think I'm a lot like a lot of folks who are watching this right now, where I wear a few different hats. I always joke that I'm a good, honest millennial of having diversified revenue streams. So I teach a little bit over at Laurier. I'm one of those forever students working on a PhD at Waterloo. I have the opportunity to work with a number of different nonprofits, charities, co-ops, and municipalities as a consultant, helping with research and program design on more like healthcare and homelessness style work, but also a little bit on environmental and housing initiatives as well. And then I worked with a group of folks over the past, coming on 6 years now, to create Union Cooperative. And we think we're fairly unique in Canada of using the cooperative model, a lot like how renewable energy cooperatives work, where we can raise money from community members, charitable foundations, and local businesses. Except rather than building solar and wind, we can use that to form the down payment required to buy existing apartment buildings that, they don't always have stainless steel and granite top, but they have long-term tenants and low rents. And these are the types of properties that are increasingly facing pressure from big investors who see it as an opportunity to put on a fresh coat of paint and either encourage or require the existing tenants to move out so they can very quickly increase the rents. So how do we as a community come together to try and provide an alternative path forward, to be one more tool in our community's tool chest? So for Union Cooperative, we work alongside the great work of social housing and municipal housing providers that support people with really complex needs and that require deep affordability. And then on the other side is the private sector that provides housing for most of us, whether it be rental or ownership. But there's that other form of missing middle. When we talk about missing middle, it's normally skyscrapers and single family homes, and missing middle being, that 4 to 8 stories. But the other form of missing middle is that rental middle. And as our rental rates increase so quickly over the last few years, that gap is getting bigger. The gap between the social housing system and the private market is getting too big for many folks to manage. So if we think of someone who is a senior on fixed income, or someone working full time in the Tim Hortons at the hospital, an artist or a social worker, all folks who can live independently, but who are increasingly being priced out of our community. So that's what we're looking to do as Union Cooperative, is to raise money from community members, foundations, and local businesses to acquire existing buildings, as well as help construct new affordable housing that fits that other form of missing middle for people who are able to live independently or with the supports available to them from other great community organizations, and just need an affordable, respectful place to call home.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really, really honorable. Can you articulate your personal mission and vision for us?
I think for me, it's just about trying to help make our community a better place to live. I think, again, like a lot of folks who are probably, for yourself and for folks who are watching this as well, it for some people it may be an awakening or an epiphany to some great moment. I think for others, like myself, it's just seeing time and time again folks struggling and wanting to do what you can to make our community a better place to live. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you see people having a hard time getting by, for just their own journey being more challenging, or the system making their journey more challenging, or some combination of the two. There are resources in this world that aren't being applied to help the folks and their causes, including environmental issues, in a way that is really making the change that we need it to. But at the same point, me working with, as a consultant, as a teacher, as a researcher, with folks who are working so hard to make their community a better place, we often struggle to access the resources that we need to impact change at scale. So thinking about an issue like union cooperative, how do we move from a model where nonprofits and charities are having to go out to developers and asking, could we please have a couple of units in your building, to a different approach where the community owns the buildings in the first place? So that got me really excited about this idea of community capital and community finance, to say, we have this money, we have these resources. How do we make decisions about what's best for our neighbor? And for us with Union Cooperative, we now have over 235 people in the community who have put their money where their hearts are and are investing locally for impact for affordable housing. And we can see this across Canada in different ways. So in Nova Scotia and PEI, Nova Scotia started the Community Economic Development Investment Funds, CEDIFs, and you may have spoken with New Dawn Enterprises, who's a leader in that space. That started after the collapse of the fisheries and coal out in the eastern provinces, but Nova Scotia specifically. And it hasn't really been replicated outside of the Atlantic provinces. So fast forward a few years to Sangudo, Alberta, a sleepy farming town west of Edmonton on your way out to Jasper. And they were experiencing what a lot of small communities experience, that young people would go off to school and then they'd only come back for the holidays because there was just no work. And the crisis point for that community was that the meat packing plant was going out of business. The gentleman who owned it was looking to retire, and he couldn't find anyone who wanted to buy a rural Albertan meat packing plant. So the community came together, inspired by the work of Nova Scotia and the Community Economic Development Investment Funds. They said, well, we don't have this special government created program here, but we do have co-ops. And we have this long history of rural communities creating co-ops. So we're going to come together, invest money in the co-op, buy the business, fix it up, and give a long-term low-interest loan to two young men who had been working in the factory, knew how it worked. Now, I'm a vegetarian, so a meatpacking plant in rural Alberta only gets me so excited. But what I saw there was a community deciding that they were going to shape their own destiny by coming together and using the resources they had. But if we jump over the mountains to Vancouver, we're seeing the same model being used to lend money to affordable housing organizations, nonprofits, community food systems. But where it started taking a turn was for an interesting turn was Minneapolis. What looked, and they were inspired by Little Sangudo, which was inspired by Nova Scotia. And they said, well, what if we take this same model, but we use it to bring new life into northeastern Minneapolis, where it's been underinvested in, but we don't want to see displacement through gentrification either. We want this to be community-led. So they created the Northeast Investment Cooperative, using the same basic approach of community members investing for local change. They bought an old building, fixed it up, and inside of it now there's a bakery, a bicycle shop, and the state's first worker cooperative brew pub. And I had the opportunity to visit it just last summer. But where it keeps going from here is a group down in the San Francisco Bay Area, the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, a Black-led cooperative that's pushing back against gentrification, rising rents, and displacement, was inspired by the Northeast Investment Cooperative, which was inspired by Sangudo, which was inspired by Nova Scotia. And they created for the first time, using this model to buy existing apartment buildings to keep them permanently affordable and in community-owned hands. And they're now also using it for small businesses and community organizations as well. So all of that wrapped up together inspired us here in Waterloo region, the long route from Nova Scotia to Alberta to Minneapolis to the Bay Area, all the way back up here, to say, well, the context is different here in Waterloo region, but certainly the challenges being faced around rising rental rates, displacement, the lack of control and agency for people who call this place home is real. How do we use these same tools, put it in our local context, and try and help our neighbors in the best way we can?
Wow, that is just a big wow. Like to see the progression of, starting it with one and just building and then going across borders and creating that awareness and making the change. Like that's exactly what we're talking about, be that change. That's amazing. Awesome. And what
Absolutely.
inspires you most about your current work?
So I'm inspired a lot by the partnerships and what we're able to learn from each other. Um, and I think once you start doing the work, you're invited to different conversations than you could before. So when we first got started, it was really hard to get people to take us seriously. But here was this little community group, this big vision, and last year we bought a $16.5 million building without any government funding, and it has 58 two-bedroom apartments in it. And now we're invited to all sorts of different conversations. One of the conversations right now is looking at whether we can have property tax reductions for affordable housing organizations in our community. And we're working to help ensure intentionally that this is available also to Indigenous organizations as well, so that they aren't paying full property tax on treaty land that was stolen from them hundreds of years ago. This is a direct form of how we can move beyond just land recognition into creating tools that recognize past harm and try to a little extent to create some social change that's useful. Nowhere near enough, but one step hopefully that's beneficial. We're also excited that we're able to work on really interesting bigger projects. So we're part of two development groups right now, nonprofit development groups that are looking to build new affordable housing. We're also hoping to push the envelope a bit to think about what does it mean to be a good housing provider, to move from being a landlord to being a housing provider. If we're going to, there'll always be folks who sometimes have challenges paying rent. What do we do? What happens if one neighbor is causing challenges for another neighbor? What does it look like to move beyond just using the core tools of eviction and court orders and all that into instead community justice and to connecting with different resources that are out there in the community, bringing tenants into decision making as well. So I think there's a lot that we don't know yet that we really have to still learn, and excited to learn from others that have been leading the way for so long.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, this is amazing. And what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and how do you or your team, what do you do to overcome them?
Yeah, so certainly, a big challenge has just been how much we have to learn so quickly. Um, because we're doing a lot of things, in a fairly novel way or for the first time, kind of all packaged together in this way. There's not a playbook. This is how it's supposed to be done. And I know it's not unique to us. Probably a lot of the folks that you're talking to are doing such creative, wonderful things for their community that, they're having to kind of come up with it, with a lot of great research and a lot of experts supporting them. But where it's different than just doing something for the fifth, the 10th, the 50th time. So I think that's one area, and trying to make sure that you stay somewhat efficient and you don't burn yourself out by trying to do everything for the first time. I think another aspect with anything in community finance is trying to make sure that you stay focused on your mission and focused on those core values that brought you there. Finance pulls it in its own directions as well. You need to make sure you have enough money to pay the bills. You need to meet the expectations of lenders and investors. So there's always that aspect of a trade-off and trying to stay rooted in, why did we start doing this in the first place? So that your decisions are informed by that as well.
Exactly. Exactly. And do you have any set of key priorities going on right now?
Yeah, so right now, we are looking to, well, we're doing some energy audits of our building now, hoping to do some retrofits to make them more environmentally sustainable, but also more comfortable for the existing occupants. And it will be an interesting challenge of retrofitting the buildings with as little inconvenience for the residents and not displacing anybody as well. So that will be a unique challenge, but something that certainly, again, we can learn from others and are excited to do that. We're also looking at new or different ways to raise money to support this work as well. There's a need to thread the needle a little bit of different systems. So banks and government lenders and what foundations and different investors want, they all work a little bit differently. And we don't have one set of rules or one type of organization that works well for all of this work. So thinking of how to navigate it in the best way. And then, as I mentioned before, working on that property tax piece, I think has a potential to be really transformative for our community. I always preface this work saying that, I'm a big government lefty. Taxes are super important, but we also apply taxes to things like drugs and alcohol and cigarettes as a way to disincentivize certain things. And we provide tax incentives for things like renewable energy and, unfortunately, oil and other things that we want to incentivize. So thinking, if we really want to encourage affordable housing, are there certain tools that we can use? And then trying to extend it to make sure that other equity deserving communities are also able to access those supports as well. And then we're just starting to think about raising funds again to go out there and buy building 2 or 3 or 4 and continue to expand the impact that we can have in our community, both on homes for people, so residential units, but also homes for small businesses and the organizations who support them and make our community a great spot to live.
So important. So important for sure. And what do you feel about the future of co-op in Canada? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so union co-op is one very specific type of cooperative, but there's a really long history of cooperatives in Canada. Of course, there's the nonprofit housing co-ops that are all across this country, and for decades have done a tremendous job of providing affordable tenant-led rentals, and that's wonderful. We took a bit of a different approach because of a lack of government funding to support new development, and we need to bring in this more this different source of funding. But there's also agricultural cooperatives. If you've ever bought an Ivanhoe cheese or Gay butter, you've bought an cooperative farmer dairy. If you have insurance from the cooperators, that's a co-op owned by the co-op and nonprofit sector, where part of the profits each year go back to support those folks. Telecom co-ops across rural Ontario are really successful. We have Arctic co-ops providing resources to far northern communities and fly-in Indigenous communities as well. And we have worker cooperatives that are starting to really have a resurgence, not only because of a push around conversions of businesses into worker ownership as their owners are retiring, but also seeing it as a different approach and an intentional difference to the traditional capitalistic hierarchical approach to running an organization. We all expect and demand that we can vote for our elected leaders, give feedback on official plans, even to give feedback on zoning or building or site plans. But we're all then willing to accept the fact that we show up to work in the morning, we're working for one person who's in charge. When a building's built, one person gets to make all the decisions. Really what this is talking about is an intentional extension of democracy into these places that we spend so much of our time and that so much of our lives rely upon. At the same point, they can be really efficient. At the same point, they're corporations just like any other, and we can organize these in many different ways. So co-ops are one more tool alongside nonprofits, charities, trusts, business corporations. They won't be the answer, but they will be the answer for some folks in some contexts.
Exactly. Perfectly put. And the last thing is, any closing thoughts or calls to action at this time?
Well, I would love to learn more about what you folks are working on, but maybe that's a different call. I think, I think that is really the call to action, is for all of us just to keep sharing with each other, to support each other, to try and build solidarity and connections across different movements, that ultimately we're all working in different spaces, different contexts, to try and make our communities better places. So the more that we're able to support each other and kind of fight back against that initial instinct to, scrap over limited resources or, whatever else, that it's through partnership and working together that we're going to hopefully kind of turn the tide here a little bit and make real change.
Exactly. And here at SETSI, it's all about amplifying work, and especially for some like yourself. This is why we do what we do. This is why we have the channel. And this is why it's gaining so much traction too, because people are really realizing that, oh my gosh, there are, organizations and co-ops like yourself that are really doing things for community. In Canada, you realize that, to me, I call it the bag of burden is food and housing.
Yeah.
That always seems to be the number one argument, those two. So, it's just so commendable that you are trying to find the solution. And I think at the end of the day, we know the problems, but it's about the solution. So I always love to just talk less and listen more, people like yourself. And, I really appreciate, again, and on behalf of SETSI, that you came on to really amplify your voice and your work. And it will just permeate throughout the universe, and everybody who is drawn to listen will listen, and make that change like you did cross border. It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah, and it
So
happens in so many different ways. So yeah, certainly anyone who is interested, I've benefited so much from all the free advice and the free sharing of information from other folks. And if there's any way that we can support someone else's journey, that's wonderful as well. Because I'm sure, as they experiment and try in different contexts, there'll be so much we can learn back from them as well.
absolutely, absolutely. So again, we appreciate you, Sean, for doing this and coming on and telling us all the things that you're doing, and the ins and outs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is what we need to hear at this time, especially as Canadians. So we will close the way that we began this interview by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toil without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, Sean, I really appreciate you, and look out for this on our YouTube channel.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too, dear. Thanks again.